Hi, everyone. We've got just a couple more minutes and then we'll get started promptly at 1 o'clock. If you have any questions or need any technical assistance, we've got Danielle Daly in the chat answering questions. Hi, everyone. Since it's 1 o'clock, we'll get started here. If you guys have questions or anything like that, or are wondering about CEs, we have Danielle Daly on our team in the chat answering questions. So just kind of refer to her there for a little bit. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Hotwagner. Our training today is on the overview and applications of applied behavior analysis. Zach, do you want to go to the next slide for me?
All right, there we go.
No, you're fine. So as you'll see on the screen here, you've got Zach, Kurt, and I presenting today. And in our office, we are part of the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network's Rockford team. So in our office, we really enjoy kind of being goofy with each other and just keeping things as light as possible because we do deal with, crisis cases. And so we've kind of somehow chosen spirit animals in our office. And the app, unfortunately, that I was using to make these funny little dancing characters did not have the exact spirit animals for all of us. My spirit animal is a dog, so I was lucky there. But I am a BCBA with the Rockford team for ICPN, and I've been in the field for, oh my gosh, like 10 years now. I started off in a residential setting, and then I kind of moved to home base, and I've been with ICPN for about the past 5 years. So I'm the dog there. And then unfortunately, Kurt is a grizzly bear, but all I could find was a polar bear. So he is the dancing polar bear. Kurt is a behavior specialist on our team here in Rockford, and he's been with us for about 2 years now, and he's got tons of previous experience for about 15 years in residential settings. And then you'll see Zach, the chicken. His spirit animal is a hawk, but they did not have that. So he's been with us for about the past year, and he's got previous experience in residential settings as well for about 9 years. So that's just a little bit about us, and then we'll kind of get started.
All right. So the outline for today in this presentation, I'll start to discuss broadly what ABA is, and then Tiffany will cover some evidence-based practices focusing on motivating operations and differential reinforcement. Kurt will then continue the presentation to discuss more evidence-based practices focusing on contingency contracting and generalization and maintenance. So this presentation is by no means all-encompassing of everything that there is to know about ABA. The topics we chose to focus on are often starting points when a behavioral concern is first being addressed. These topics may also be some of our recommendations we may provide as the support services team if an individual is referred to us. As you'll learn from this presentation, these strategies can be easily, implemented without a behavior analyst. If the individual is fortunate enough, though, to be able to have ABA services, as part of their plan, and a provider can be secured, this person is often like a valuable asset to the team. So we just wanted to kind of outline what we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll just jump right in. So what is ABA? ABA is an abbreviation for Applied Behavior Analysis. ABA is a science devoted to understanding and improving human behavior. The focus, goals, and methods used in ABA set it apart from other fields that have the same goal. Target behaviors that could cause harm or interfere with learning are identified in the environment they are occurring in. ABA focuses on observable behaviors in the environment and then manipulating the environment to change that behavior. It does not focus on changing an individual's thoughts, and it's not a form of counseling therapy. ABA is not only used with people who are diagnosed with autism or other intellectual or developmental disabilities. The principles used in ABA can be utilized with anyone and can be even used to change behavior in your pets, other animals, geriatric population, sports, workplaces, just to name a few. ABA is also not a form of bribery. What an individual is working towards is discussed prior to the challenging behavior and is not used to get the person to stop engaging in that behavior. This is an important distinction that separates earning something from exhibiting a desired behavior, for exhibiting a desired behavior from giving someone something to make the behavior stop. If you're giving someone something to make the behavior stop, you may see this behavior occur more often. For example, say a child screaming at the checkout counter because they want a piece of candy, and then they're given a piece of candy. They're more likely to scream in the future to get the candy because they were given it. So just as an example, we don't use it as a form of bribery. It's, earning towards something, and those expectations are set prior. So the three-term contingency, you'll hear these referred to as the ABCs of behavior, and these refer to the antecedent, behavior, and consequence for the A, B, and the C. So we're going to talk about each one here. The antecedent is what occurs immediately before the behavior. This could be a variety of things, from maybe a peer being too close to someone, the environment being too loud, a task demand being asked of someone, or wanting something that somebody can have access to. There's a variety more of antecedents. Those are just a few examples to name a few. At times, it can be difficult to determine what specifically caused the behavior to occur. So documenting as much information as possible can allow for trends in the data over time to be analyzed to determine what the true cause or function is to the behavior. We're going to discuss here in a little bit the possible functions to behavior, and that's coming up on the next slide. Even though it may not be apparent what the cause of the behavior was, there's always a reason to why the behavior occurred. The B for behavior is the observable action that the person exhibited. It's important to be specific as to know what the behavior looked like. So if you were to say that an individual hit somebody, what did this look like? It leaves a lot, of questions as, to what it looked like. Was it an open hand hit? Was it closed fist? How many times did the person hit the other person? Where was the hit? Head, back, shoulders. Behavior does not always mean something bad, even though mostly, the behaviors of the concern are the ones that are discussed. Someone completing a chore, finishing their homework, eating their vegetables, maybe some good examples of behavior that, aren't necessarily like bad, like physical aggression or property destruction or anything like that. And then the last one, the consequence, is what happens immediately after the behavior occurs. This could be praise from someone, maybe a loss of privilege, removing an individual from somebody else's space. Examples go on and on here. Depending on what the consequence is after the behavior occurs, this could result in the behavior occurring more or less frequently in the future. So as I said, we're going to talk about the functions of behavior. So we're going to go over 4 main functions of behavior and then briefly discuss each of them with some examples. So sensory behaviors are driven through internal sensations and does not rely on other people to be reinforcing. This is commonly seen, but not limited to individuals with autism who engage in self-stimulatory behaviors. This occurs regardless of what is going on in the environment because the behavior itself is self-stimulating. Some common examples include hand flapping, hair twirling, cracking knuckles, or maybe picking at skin. The next one, escape behaviors result in the individual getting out of a task or activity that they did not want to do. Often when these behaviors occur, whatever's being asked is removed, increasing the likelihood that the behavior will occur more in the future. So for example, if someone is asked to eat their vegetables and instead of eating them, they start screaming and throw them on the floor, this results in them not having to eat the vegetables. So in the future, the behavior of screaming and throwing the food on the floor may occur more often to avoid eating the vegetables. The third one we're going to talk about is attention. Attention-maintained behaviors occur in order to receive attention from others in the environment. An example could be a child who cries every time their parents leave the room, resulting in the parent returning to the room. In this example, attention functions as the reinforcer because the crying results in the parent returning to check on the child. And then the last one is tangible, and tangible maintained behaviors occur in order to gain access to preferred items or activities. So when the behavior has occurred in the past, the individual may have been reinforced by being given access to the item or activity they wanted. So for example, a child is at the store and they wanted a new toy. When they're told no, they throw themselves on the ground and scream. The parent then gets the child the toy. In the future, this behavior is more likely to occur in order to get the toy because they were reinforced by being given the toy. It's important to note that sometimes behaviors occur due to multiple functions. This could mean that a person might exhibit a behavior to gain access to something tangible, something that they can't have, but they might continue to exhibit the behavior, for attention from others. At times, it can also be difficult to determine why the behavior is occurring. One of the main purposes of this field is to help address this. So on your screen, it's probably kind of small depending on how you have your screen set up, but this is called a functional analysis screening tool. You may also hear to it, abbreviated to FAST, and it's a form to help identify the functions that we just discussed. This form can be found online and used to interview people who know the individual well. The form's fairly straightforward and includes short answer questions to identify the behaviors of concern. So describing, what specifically the behavior looks like in detail, and then a series of questions that are yes, no. And then based on the answers to these questions, it results in the hypothesized function of the behavior being identified. This isn't a guarantee as to why the behavior is occurring, but it can be used like a compass to put an intervention strategy in place that may be helpful to reduce the occurrence of challenging behaviors in the future. So we're going to talk now about the 4 consequences of behavior. So we have reinforcement and punishment are 2 components that result in the behavior occurring more or less frequently in the future. Let's first discuss what both of those are. So reinforcement occurs when something changes in the environment immediately after the behavior, and as a result, the behavior increases in the future. Reinforcement is a key component to many behavior change programs that you may see implemented. Punishment occurs when something in the environment changes immediately after the behavior, and as a result, the behavior decreases in the future. So to recap those 2, reinforcement occurs when the behavior increases, and punishment occurs when the behavior decreases in the future. So before discussing some examples, it's important to note what the terms positive and negative mean. Positive simply means adding something to the environment, and negative means removing something. So now that we've broken down all those components and what they mean, let's discuss each of them based on a positive and negative change. So starting at the top left there, for positive reinforcement, you would want to be adding something immediately to the environment, resulting in the behavior occurring more in the future. An example of this could be your child finishing reading a book for school, and then immediately when they are finished, they're given their favorite candy bar. This would increase the likelihood that they would read more books in the future to earn the candy bar. If the book's long and maybe take some time to finish, smaller reinforcers could be used as the child completes chapters or maybe a set number of pages to motivate them to continue reading. If your child does not like candy, this could mean that the item being given might not increase the behavior. So later on in the presentation, Tiffany is going to talk about preference assessments and how they're used to try to figure out what an individual likes to make it reinforcing to increase those behaviors that you want to see. So moving on to the next one there in the top right, negative reinforcement, you would be removing something immediately from the environment, resulting in the behavior occurring more in the future. When first learning this term, the negative component may be associated with loss or punishment, but this isn't always the case. Remember, negative only means the removal of something from the environment. So for an example, your child no longer wants to ride in the shopping cart at the store, so they start screaming. You remove them from the shopping cart and allow them instead to walk next to the cart. The negative in this example is being removed from the shopping cart, but they're more likely to scream in the future because you let them out of the shopping cart to walk. So now that we understand negative and positive reinforcement, where behaviors increased through changing the environment positively or negatively by adding or removing something, the opposite is true for punishment. Remember that punishment causes the behavior to decrease. So looking at the bottom left there, for positive punishment, you would add something immediately to the environment, resulting in the behavior occurring less often in the future. So an example of this could be someone speeding to get to work, and a police officer stops them and writes them a ticket. This will most likely result in the behavior of speeding decreasing in the future because a ticket was added to that environment, given to that person, decreasing the behavior of speeding in the future. Lastly, on this slide, negative punishment, you would remove something immediately from the environment, resulting in the behavior occurring less often in the future. An example could be a child hitting their sibling while at the park. The parent responds by not allowing the child back on the playground for 5 minutes. So they're losing the playground time for 5 minutes. That's the negative. The loss of the playground time should decrease the likelihood that hitting would occur in the future. So this slide, general application, it lays out the techniques to create behavior change. So when an individual begins receiving services for ABA, it's important to first rule out any medical factors that may be contributing to an individual's challenging behavior. This could be an underlying health condition, maybe a medication, injury, or any other factor that might be resulting in some kind of, medical factor. After consulting with an individual's medical team to rule out anything medically related, the next step is to identify the behavior or behaviors that you want to see change and define what those behaviors look like when they occur. It's important to involve members of the individual's team in this process to get more information on how the behavior occurs. This is even more important if the behavior can't be observed due to it occurring at like a super low frequency, or other factors like maybe like a new person being in the environment and them not exhibiting that behavior because they see new people in the environment. Next, any data that has been gathered or documented on for the behavior will be analyzed to attempt to determine why the behavior is occurring. So as discussed previously, this is also known as the function. A functional assessment such as the FAST, interviews with the team, and other methods may be used. As stated previously, a function may sometimes be difficult to identify, or the behavior may have multiple functions. So after the function is determined, a replacement behavior will be identified to teach the individual how to fulfill the reason why they are exhibiting the challenging behavior. So a common functionally equivalent replacement behavior could be to teach someone how to use a picture card to request a snack instead of hitting in order to get a snack. An intervention will then be put in place to address the challenging behavior. During this time, it's important to consider how to implement this intervention across environments with all the people who will be working with the individual. Training should occur with everyone so the intervention is implemented consistently with all members of the team. The skills learned should then be maintained over time so that the individual remains fluent in the newly acquired skills. So I will hand it off to Tiffany now.
Thanks, Zach. All right, so now that Zach's kind of done a little bit of an overview of ABA, I know we've had some other trainings that go a little bit more in depth, but we did want to talk about like those main points just so that the rest of this will make sense when we're, applying some of these evidence-based practices. So Kurt and I will talk about 4 main ones in the next hour and a half. And the reason that we wanted to do these was just because they kind of come up in a lot of our cases. They're fairly important to behavior plans and things like that. So they're pretty relevant and they're fairly simple with some of the examples that we have and how you can kind of apply that in your own work and with your own clients. Obviously, there's no one size fits all strategy. So keep that in mind as we kind of review this stuff. All right, so I wanted to talk about motivating operations. This is pretty important and it's actually really simple when you think about it. A motivating operation as defined by the ABA Bible, as we call it. It's this big white book and it's got everything that BCBAs need to take their exam. But according to Cooper, an environmental variable that alters, which can increase or decrease the reinforcing or punishing effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event, which would be, it can be like a reinforcer or some type of consequence, punishment. And it also alters, which increases or decreases the current frequency of the behavior that has been reinforced or punished by that stimulus, object, or event. So all that mumbo jumbo basically means it's kind of what's motivating us to behave a certain way right now. So examples of this could be hunger, thirst, being tired. So for me, I knew that I was probably going to get thirsty talking so much today. So I've got my smoothie and my water available to me just to kind of keep me going. And motivating operations are either an establishing operation, which is just a fancy word for being deprived of something, or deprivation, like being in a state of deprivation, or abolishing operation, which means that you would be in a state of like satiation where you don't need anything because you've got too much of it. So if you look at the picture here, we've got deprivation versus satiation. And so the girl on the left, she's in the sun, she's super hot. Hold on, I gotta make my screen a little bit bigger. And she's saying, it's so hot, I wish I could jump in a pile of snow. So she's in a state of deprivation, meaning that she wishes she could be cold right now. She's trying to get cooler and she can't. She's being deprived of some cooler temperatures to help regulate her body. Whereas on the other side, you've got the guy in the blanket and he is in a state of satiation with being so cold. And he's saying, please make it stop snowing. I can't wait for summer. I've had too much cold. I want some heat. So you can kind of look at it both ways, but we're always in some sort of state of deprivation or satiation, right? I've got my water with me so that I can stay in a state of satiation. As you know, I'm talking. I want to make sure that I can stay nice and hydrated so that I can continue on. So it's really what's causing us to want more or less of what could be considered reinforcers. So like if I'm hungry, I'm probably deprived of food, and therefore I'll behave in a way that will give me access to food. If I'm hot, I'm satiated on heat, and my body may be experiencing those negative effects of too much heat. I actually have my heater on right now, so I'm probably going to turn that off because I'm getting hot. And then I'm sorry, what was I saying? And or deprived of cooler temperatures to keep my body temperature regulated correctly so that I'll then behave in a way that gets me access to cooling down, like drinking cold water, finding shade, or a fan, or some AC. So for me just now, I was getting hot, so I turned off my heater over here so that I can access some cooler airflow. When we're looking at providing reinforcement to someone to increase the frequency of a behavior that we want to see more of, so we're trying to teach them, those adaptive skills to replace a challenging behavior. We need to think about the value of the reinforcer at the time that we're looking to provide it to the person. If we're giving someone M&Ms after they clean their room, we want to make sure that they're not already satiated on M&Ms or chocolate, or they didn't just eat a big meal and they're super full and maybe M&Ms aren't going to be something that they want right now. I remember as a kid, I would have like a stash of Halloween candy. So around Halloween time or right after Halloween, candy wasn't really reinforcing for me. So my parents saying, after you finish your broccoli, you can have some candy. I was like, well, I've got candy available to me all the time. I'm satiated on candy. I don't need candy. Why would I eat my broccoli? So I'm not going to clean my room for more candy, especially if I have my own stash of candy. If that makes sense. All right, so I thought this picture was kind of perfect for this. We're just going to talk about applications of MOs or motivating operations in like your daily work, things that you can apply to your own work. I'll be talking about preference assessments, keeping that, reinforcement relevant to the person at the time, and then the PREMAC principle, as well as a daily schedule. So the dog over here is so tired that they don't even care about snacks. I don't know that my dogs are ever in that mood, but this dog obviously was, because they put snacks all around it, and you can tell he was just like, nah, I'm going to take a nap. All right, so in front of you, this is just a shortened example of a preference assessment that we use. There's a couple different versions of this tool, and you can definitely modify it and make it your own, or you can just create one on your own too. It kind of depends on, what you have available to the person that you're trying to find reinforcers to. If you don't have, a TV, I don't know anyone that doesn't, but if you don't have a TV available for them to watch TV on, then you're not going to have it on the preference assessment to see whether or not they like watching TV. So this is just something you can like Google preference assessments, and they have examples that you can just take and use on your own, or you can just make like a quick Word document. This looks like it would be super easy to make. You put the person's name at the top, the date, and then just a list of things that you want to see, like how much does the person like these things? How little do they like these things? So preference assessments are really just tools that we use to identify reinforcers for people. And honestly, like with preference assessments, the reason I have this under MOs and or motivating operations is because we really want to pay attention to how things in the environment are affecting the individuals that we serve in the moment that we're trying to help provide them with reinforcers so that they'll, increase those more adaptive and appropriate behaviors that we want them to kind of build and work on. So really with these, you can either like ask the person on a scale of, 1 to 5, how much do you like this activity or item, or do you like it a little bit or a lot, just depending on their skill level. If they aren't verbally able to tell you what they like or don't like, you can also just have them interact with the environment, have all of the possible reinforcers around you, and kind of like write down how often they're interacting with those things and how much they seem to enjoy interacting with those items. And then you can kind of see like, well, they really liked hanging out and watching TV. They watched a movie for a good 45 minutes, and then they kind of moved on to bouncing that ball. And then they were bouncing the ball for 10 minutes. So maybe TV is more reinforcing than the ball. Just like making notes of what they prefer, what they interact with in the environment that you might be able to kind of utilize as a reinforcement later. Another way to figure out, what's motivating to a person, what could be used as a reinforcer in the future, is asking, the people that work closely with them, asking family, asking friends, especially in different environments. Maybe we don't have access to a calculator in the home for whatever reason, but at work, they love using the calculator and they just boop, 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 boop all day long. So kind of talking to people across environments. If something's really enforcing in one environment, you could try it in another environment and see if it's still reinforcing for them. And then kind of use that later on to help build a program and provide more reinforcement to help them stay motivated in using those adaptive skills that we're teaching them. So we just want to keep in mind as well, kind of thinking about preference assessments and figuring out, reinforcers for people, that the people we serve are people, they're human, right? I don't still like watching Barney, but I used to love it as a kid. I would watch it every single day, but people change over time. Everyone's human. Some things appeal to you one day, some things appeal to you the next day. So we need to just make sure that because so-and-so has always watched, Disney movies growing up, living at home with mom and dad, doesn't mean that when they move into their first, residential setting, that they're going to continue to like watching Disney movies, especially if everyone in the house is like gung-ho on Real Housewives together. You just want to keep in mind that yes, they may still have an interest in that, but it might not be as reinforcing in the next setting or, a year down the line. So these preference assessments really kind of keep us on track, and they keep us, relevant really with the people that we serve, and figuring out, how to get them more motivated and help them kind of move and grow in life and be successful. So I just wanted to also say, with preference assessments, motivating operations at the time that we do a preference assessment with our individuals is going to also be really important. So paying attention to who is doing the preference assessment with the person is going to be important. If you know for a fact that they don't like the staff working that's doing the preference assessment, they might not be as willing to tell you all the things that they like. They might be like, I don't want to do this. I hate everything. Leave me alone. So just making sure that the environment when you're doing a preference assessment is also helpful to you guys in getting good enough data and figuring out what they like or dislike. Even if, the person is super tired and hungry at the time that they're doing the preference assessment, even if they like who's doing it with them, that day they might prefer, relaxing activities because they're tired, and food like might be really, really, really reinforcing because they're hungry when you do that preference assessment. So just making sure that you kind of keep those things in mind. And then doing preference assessments, as often as necessary to make sure that we're keeping up with what our folks like or dislike. That way, when we go to, provide reinforcers to the people we support, they're not like, I'm over that. I don't like that anymore. That's why we want to continue to do preference assessments so that we can kind of keep up and make sure that we're still staying relevant. Just seeing if there was anything else I wanted to talk about on those. And then the last thing I did want to say was just kind of keeping a few options in mind as well. Sometimes, we'll say, we're going to build a program based on your preference assessment and you love watching Disney movies. So you're going to earn watching a Disney movie. Well, that person might not want to watch the Disney movie that day. So just keeping in mind, like having a couple of options of reinforcers available and letting the person choose can help build more motivation in saying, these are the options we have available to us right now of, what you want to earn. So do you want X or Y for, the thing that you're earning today? And then it kind of builds in that motivation because the person feels like they have a choice, they have, you know, responsibility in their own programming. And if, you know, they can't tell you, you can, you know, hold up pictures of the items or hold up the actual items themselves if you can, and just kind of like help them figure out what they would like to do. So with that said, we can move on to pre-MAC principle. Let me see here. So I did want to talk about pre-MAC principle because I think it's pretty prevalent in the work that we do. You will also hear it referred to as first then or grandma's law. In ABA, that's the official like pre-MAC principle, but I refer to it a lot as just the first then strategy. It's a little bit more well known. Basically, what is first then? It's kind of building motivation for someone to do one thing. That way they can access, you know, the next thing that they enjoy. So the reason it's called grandma's law is because you kind of hear your grandma in the back of your mind, or a caregiver of some sort, saying first you got to eat your vegetables, then you get your chocolate cake. It's kind of like that. So for me personally, like, I don't like cooking. I'm not good at it. I'm terrible at it. And so my problem is that I love orange tofu, and my mom makes it, but she's not always around to make it. She's got her own life. So when I want orange tofu and my mom's not around to make it for me, I have to make orange tofu myself. So I've got this non-preferred activity that I have to do of cooking the orange tofu, but then I get to eat the orange tofu. So it's just kind of creating, you know, motivation for myself of, well, if you cook, you do get this awesome reward of eating the orange tofu after. I think I'm a slide behind you, Zach. Can you go back to one more forward? Yeah. So this is just a visual example. Something that we often use in our office. We'll create this. I create something like this in Word, where I just kind of make like the boxes and stick the icons on there. It's pretty easy to make in Word if you figure it out, but it's basically just a couple icons that we can use where you put the lesser preferred or the lower probability behavior in the first column, and then you put the higher probability or preferred activity in the second column. So this person maybe didn't really want to wash their hands, but they got to wash their hands, right? Especially to use the tablet. You don't want to have sticky like chocolate or something on the tablet. So we got to wash our hands first, and then we'll get the tablet. We just want to ensure that there's access to the preferred item or activity afterwards, so that they'll have that motivation. How to use first then. So this is just kind of like a quick rundown of how we use it. It's pretty simple. You'll just place the lesser preferred activity or that lower probability behavior under the first, the word first, and then you'll place the more preferred activity or that higher probability behavior icon under then. You always want to consider the person's possible motivating operations at play when choosing the second activity or tasks, as this can change and on a regular basis, and it can change the effectiveness of the tool. Like if I'm satiated on using my tablet, I'm not going to be motivated to wash my hands before I use a tablet because I don't really care about the tablet. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then number 3 there, we want to point to the first activity, tell the client first whatever we're doing, point to the second activity, tell them, then we're going to do this. So the example would be like first take a bath, then have snack. Some people that you work with, just keeping it as simple as possible. Some people you could just point and they'll know, but that's basically the concept of it. So when the client complies, we want to provide that behavior specific praise. So instead of just saying like, good job with the first activity, if, they've got to wash their hands first to get the tablet, then we want to say, awesome washing your hands. Other examples, great job completing that puzzle. Wonderful sitting down. Just making sure that we're praising that exact behavior we want to see, building them up, making sure that they know that we're excited and happy that they, completed that task, and then let the client know that they have access to that next then activity. So then we'll say, awesome job washing your hands. All right, let's go get that tablet. If the client doesn't comply with the first icon or whatever activity, you might need to repeat the request. Some people have slower processing times. You might need to use less words. Sometimes we talk too much and then the client gets a little confused. So just kind of switching up how you're doing it. If they're still not complying, then we might need to look at what we have in that then column to make sure that it's motivating. So maybe, like I was saying earlier, if I've been using the tablet all day long, then I'm not going to want to continue to use the tablet just because you want me to wash my hands. So finding something else that they can do instead that they're not completely satiated on. Let me see. So yeah, or if a person, if we put on the first then, first make your bed, then have pretzels. If the person just ate or they just had a bunch of snacks all day at DT because, can you go back, Zach? Sorry. If they were at a party, we just had Juneteenth and Father's Day and Memorial Day. So maybe they had a party or something and they were eating all day long because there were fun snacks at the party. And then they come home and we say, first make your bed, then have pretzels. They're going to be like, I don't really want pretzels. I don't eat pretzels. But if they're asking for their tablet or they haven't used their tablet in a few hours and they do really enjoy using their tablet, we can switch out the pretzels for the tablet and say, first make your bed, then we get to play on the tablet. Just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit and figuring out what's going to get them motivated to get this first task done. All right. This next slide, I've got a video just for those of you at home, or if you don't have a laminator, we like to laminate all of our visuals just because they last longer. But here's kind of a how to make your own at home video. I don't think there's audio. I think there's just music that we're missing. All right. So that was just an example. It's a pretty simple tool to kind of have around and use, and you can use it with a lot of clients. I really like making them and using that strategy because it really does help build some motivation. I did have a client who was struggling with, they had just moved into Acilla and they were struggling with seeing their parents and being able to have visits with them. So this was one of the strategies I used and it was successful. It might not be successful every time you use it, but it is pretty helpful. The parent was Sorry, I was just reading a comment. The parents were, in the room kind of like cleaning up and waiting for the person to, decide that they want to interact with them. And the person was adamant on, I think Zach and I both have this client, but the person was adamant on staying by the front door and kind of like watching traffic go by. And I was like, hey, bud, like first, let's go say hi to mom, and then we'll come back to the door. And he was like, oh, okay. And so we went, said hi to mom for a couple minutes, were able to interact with her. And then he knew he was going to get to go back to the door and watch traffic again. So then we went back to the door. It just felt a little bit more of that compliance and motivation to, I don't really want to say hi to mom. Maybe I'm mad at her. Maybe I really miss her and I don't know how to process that feeling. And then knowing that you get to do something preferred after that, like, let's just get it over. And then we get to go and hang out by the door again. So that was just a little example. All right. And then we have daily schedules. So I know a lot of like people that we support use daily schedules. They might look different than this. This is just something I created in Word document for a client. Usually I put like the person's name on there so they know it's theirs, because maybe they have a peer with a similar schedule. This one specifically, I have the left column of icons or places to put the icons available. It's just a simple one with 4 icons available that you can put on there. And then you've got the arrows pointing over to the done column with the check mark. So once they finish each task, they can move it over to like the completed column there and say, okay, that's done. And then they can look over to the left again and see what's next on their list of things to do that day. And then you've got like the example of the different icons that you can put on there. So I just wanted to talk about visual schedules because we definitely have things throughout our days that maybe we don't really like doing. I don't really like doing trainings as much, but I know that I'll go home and like get to relax and play with my dogs afterwards, right? So we don't want to just like build people's schedules with things that they just have to get done, especially if the person's not going to enjoy any of those activities. Like looking at a schedule of 4 different things that I have to do that I don't want to do, I'm not going to want to do the schedule or follow it. So just keeping in mind those motivating operations and thinking, how can I help this person like get through their day and not hate their day because I'm making them shower and toilet and brush their teeth and take meds and they don't like doing any of those things. So we really want to keep in mind like that motivation, how to get our individuals motivated and continuing on with their day, and kind of like making sure that, we can be flexible with them and providing them choice and opportunities to do things that they enjoy throughout their day. When creating a daily schedule, we want the people that we support involved. And it's important to remember this. I know sometimes like we'll talk to someone and say, what do you want to do throughout your day? Like, let's make you a daily schedule. But we don't want the same exact icons on there every single day, because it also creates like a fixed routine that feels like you don't have the power to change. So it is really nice to also have like the extra icons of different activities, like depending on if it's a weekend or there's a fun like outing planned, to be able to switch things up. And I know too, like with staff turnover and things like that, or, emergencies or things that just come up on a regular basis, if you have a fixed schedule, it would be hard for me to understand like, well, this is my daily schedule. I can't do X because I'm supposed to do Y. So just like creating that flexibility and using as much of our abilities as possible to create more flexible schedules and environments for, the people we support, because not everyone wants to do the same thing every day either, especially if you don't have a lot of activities like planned, like if you don't go to DT every day, if you don't go to school every day, if you're just on the retirement path and you're home all day, you want some different things to kind of keep you engaged and keep that therapeutic environment going. So just trying to be creative and flexible with daily schedules. And we definitely, like I was saying before, we don't want to fill daily schedules with just things that need to get done. Working in residential, I remember, like, looking back, being very like rigid when I was a DSP, and like, meds have to get done, then I have to cook, then I have to clean up, then I have to do that. And I've got this list going in my head, but that's my schedule. That's not the client's schedule. So just making sure that we can help them kind of engage with something, with choice and flexibility. Like, I don't always want to shower in the morning, or maybe I got up late this morning and I don't have time to shower. Is it fair to me that, you woke me up late, or I woke up late, and you're going to rush me into the shower when I'm barely awake? Like, that's when you can kind of be more flexible and say, okay, what do we need to get done this morning? Like, what's most important? What do you want to, make sure you get done before you go to work? Let's figure out what those things are, and we'll put it on your schedule. So maybe showering isn't as important. I can just make a note to second shift and say, hey, they didn't get to shower this morning, but they said they are cool with showering this afternoon because they're just too tired today to kind of fit it in before heading out the door. So just kind of like trying to not be so rigid in your mind, and making sure that the person is, able to have that responsibility of helping to make their own schedule too. So you definitely want to have the person involved creating them. Each day is different. We don't want to just kind of have a rigid schedule. And we definitely want to just remember that we're there to support, the people that we're supporting, and that we need to work with them to achieve goals together. So it's not just, this is what you need to do, get it done kind of a thing. Like, you could have toileting and then maybe watching the news, and then we'll do meds, and then maybe you can go hang out and listen to some music. Like, it doesn't have to be just make your bed, eat breakfast, brush your teeth, watch TV. You can just throw in some other things, kind of like asking the person and trying to figure out, like, how can we make this a little bit more appealing for you to, get things done, but also have a little bit of a better day. I think that was it for there. We will do like a 5-minute break in case anyone needs to use the bathroom, get a drink of water. I need to drink some water myself. So then we'll come back at, we'll say 1:56. All right. So hopefully everyone is back from their bathroom break. I saw someone in the chat was asking if the webinar is over. It's not over. We just did like a 5-minute bathroom break. All right. So the second thing after motivating operations that I wanted to discuss was differential reinforcement. I really liked this cute little meme of the baby. So let's get this straight. I don't have to cry and yell to get a cookie. Differential reinforcement. Oh, thank you. I see some comments over here. Differential reinforcement is reinforcing one behavior instead of another, which would often be the challenging behavior, to increase the future display of the more appropriate behavior instead of the challenging behavior. So basically, we're kind of reinforcing that adaptive behavior or replacement behavior that we want to see more of, and trying to give as little attention as possible to the challenging behavior. Obviously, I was looking in the comments about, there are behaviors where we can't just completely ignore them, right? And we never want to ignore a person, but we can minimize attention. We can, not make eye contact. We can use very little language. And then we definitely want to focus on, the positive. So many times I have had clients or individuals that I'm working with tell me that they do things because there's so many rules and they can't stand the rules and they feel like everyone's telling them no, and they feel like they have no agency, or they feel like their life is just so restricted that they can't do anything or they can't do anything right, and they just feel kind of defeated. So I have in working in this field noticed that a lot of our language is kind of negative. And so I think it's kind of a natural thing too. I don't know if it's cultural or what, but a lot of people just kind of revert back to no, stop, don't. And that's, we've got this list of rules for, SILAs for, house rules, right? Like no swearing and you can't be mean to people, and just kind of like wording things more negatively and telling people what they cannot do. So I wanted to talk about differential reinforcement because it does kind of focus on the positive and helping the people that we support with what they can do right. It's just kind of switching the way that we think a little bit. And I think that, it's so ingrained in a lot of us from, being kids told like, no, stop, don't. Rules are natural. They're a part of everyday life and society, but we also want to focus on the good stuff. We don't just want to focus on the bad stuff and make people feel defeated or like they can't, grow. So this is just kind of a reminder. I recommend differential reinforcement to a lot of teams because it is something that I feel like we can definitely work on. And I'm the same way in my own like personal life. Is I tell my dog to stop barking and he barks all the time, but instead of telling him no, stop barking, give him something else that he can do. Get them, on that positive, like more focused on positive path. So we definitely want to use this tool, have it in our toolbox, and teach, staff, family on a regular basis to help encourage people that we support instead of just focusing on the negative stuff. And I know behavior, like challenging behaviors, are a big deal sometimes. Like they can be a really, really big deal. They can be dangerous. And it's hard not to talk about those things amongst each other, but we can make it, an environment for the people we support to feel like they're empowered and they're supported, and we want them to grow and learn. So this is just kind of a reminder, like we can ignore some of the bad stuff or, ignore as much as possible the bad stuff and focus on the good stuff. So with that, we'll kind of go on to the next slide. This slide is a lot of information, but I wanted to talk about 3 different types of differential reinforcement. There are a couple more. They're a little bit more technical, so I didn't really get into them, just because we did want to focus on more simple things that you guys can apply to, your work every day. That maybe you've got some challenging behaviors that you're dealing with, but it doesn't really require, SST to get involved. So these are some things that, like I said before, I love differential reinforcement and I like to make recommendations because it can be really simple to implement. It just takes some practicing. So the first type of differential reinforcement that I wanted to talk about was differential reinforcement of other behavior. You will also hear it as DRO. So there's like a more technical side to it if you have the tools and resources. And then I've got like a very simple version of it that I'm going to share with you. In ABA, the more like technical thing to do with DRO, well, first of all, let me just explain what it is real quickly. We're going to reinforce the absence of the challenging behavior during a period of time. So when the behavior is not occurring, we're just going to reinforce the person. It doesn't matter what they're doing as long as that behavior is not happening. So on the more technical side, I know staffing is very limited right now. Everyone is in a staffing crisis and there's definitely a shortage of people available and there's lots of burnout. So maybe right now doing the more technical version of this is not possible for you. That's why I'm going to provide like a simple version, but just to kind of talk about the more technical side, we first want to get a baseline of how often the challenging behavior is occurring. So maybe we kind of like come and observe the individual and we do it for like an hour one day, 30 minutes another day for 2 hours. We just want to get like a baseline of how often the challenging behavior is happening. Once we feel pretty confident in like an average amount of time between each instance of that behavior happening, we'll say, okay, my average of observing this behavior occurring is every 30 minutes or so. So then once you figure out that, we also want to figure out when we're going to, I guess, implement this procedure. So you'll kind of figure out like who the staff is that's going to do it, or, you want to train them on how they're going to do it, but you'll set a timer and then you'll provide reinforcement when the timer goes off for the behavior that did not occur. So we're going to set our timer. If it was happening every 30 minutes, we'll say, okay, I want to set my, this person up for success. We're not going to set it for every 30 minutes because it's happening every 30 minutes, but maybe we'll do every 20 minutes. So the behavior doesn't happen in the 20 minutes, the timer goes off, you provide them reinforcement. You'll be using, that preference assessment to figure out what you're going to reinforce them with. Think about all those different motivating operations at play. Are they super hot? Are they super cold? Are they hungry? Are they full? Have they been using their tablet all day? Have they been bouncing the ball all day? Are they asking for certain items? How can we reinforce them? So once that timer goes off, you provide reinforcement, and then you'll reset the timer and do it again. If the behavior did occur at the end of the interval, you're just going to reset your timer and start again without providing reinforcement. Sometimes you can let them know like, hey, if you play with this ball, quietly, maybe their behavior is screaming. If you tell them like, hey, in the next 20 minutes, if you're quiet and hanging out with your friends, I'm gonna, let you know that at that time you can get X or whatever they're earning. But you don't necessarily have to do that either, especially if maybe they don't have that ability to like understand maybe what you're saying, or like they don't really understand time as much, but you can definitely do that. And then if for some reason that day that you're providing the reinforcement after the timer goes off, if the timer is going off and they've displayed that behavior every single interval that your timer set for, and you're not able to provide them reinforcement, then you'll want to kind of look at, okay, I've got my timer for 20 minutes and they're yelling every 20 minutes at least. So I'm going to change the interval. I'm going to go down to 15 minutes and hopefully I can provide them some sort of reinforcement. That way they get to meet, have contact with the reinforcement and hopefully earn it again. So it just kind of, this is more of the technical side. Like I said, if you have, staff available, if you've got a timer, if you've got some reinforcement, and if you have that time to really like pay attention to, them not displaying that behavior, this is something that you could do, then that's kind of how that works. There's lots of resources online too. If you are interested in more of that technical side of it, you can kind of look it up. But I will say the simple version is catch the person doing good. It's really just, you can set a timer if you want to, or have staff just like set a timer on their phone, or have like a little timer, like a kitchen buzzer or something going off every 5 minutes. If you don't hear the person screaming, like, hey, you're awesome. Like, look at you watching TV quietly. Like, here's, M&Ms or whatever the reinforcement is. Just catch them doing good, or find something that they're doing in the moment that's not the challenging behavior and be like, I love how quiet you're being watching TV. You are awesome. You're a rock star. Keep up the good work. And it doesn't have to be as complicated. Like the simple version, if you don't have the resources, if you don't have, the staff, if your staff are burnt out, they're working 12, 24 hours in a row, just let them know like, hey, whenever you see that person being awesome and not engaging and screaming, praise them, provide them with some type of reinforcement, just catch them being good. And then, that positive experience of, hey, I'm getting attention, I'm getting positive attention for this behavior or that behavior. It's going to, build up, and they're going to hopefully, learn that these are all the things I can do. And I don't have to scream to get attention, or for whatever reason they're screaming. All right, so then we have differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, which is DRA. This is reinforcing occurrences of desirable behavior while withholding reinforcement for challenging behavior. So you're going to pick an alternative behavior that exists in the person's current repertoire, so something that the person can do already. And that requires equal or less effort than the challenging behavior. So you want this behavior to basically replace the challenging behavior. You want to make sure that they can do it, and that it meets the person's needs. So whatever the function is for the challenging behavior, Zach talked about doing fasts, for example. So if you do the fast, you find out the function of the behavior is attention. So you want to see what else can the person do that gets them attention. So instead of stomping their feet for attention, you can have the person point to an object. Maybe you've seen them point to an object before. So you would just prompt them to point to that object instead of stomping their feet. So even though they might still be displaying the challenging behavior, So even if they are displaying the challenging behavior, you're going to use that behavior specific praise and say, hey, awesome pointing to the object you wanted. Here's that object. You want to just praise it as soon as possible. You want to reinforce it as soon as possible. That way they know that, oh, I, can get attention by pointing to the staff or whatever instead of stomping my feet. I guess that was more of a tangible, for a function. But so really, you're just not reinforcing the challenging behavior. You're going to ignore that challenging behavior that they're displaying as much as possible, as long as it's safe. And then you're going to just provide as much reinforcement as possible for that appropriate alternative behavior. And then you really, so with this technique, like you're paying attention to the good stuff, trying to ignore the bad stuff as much as possible. And hopefully, you know, that's going to help them learn that this appropriate behavior is going to get me what I want immediately. And the staff are like telling me how awesome I am at the same time. So that is DRA. DRI. So differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. This is very similar to DRA. It's actually a form of BRA. But instead of just picking like any other behavior that's going to get the person like their needs met, you're going to pick something that they cannot do the same time that they're engaging in the challenging behavior. So if I'm slapping someone, I can't also be clapping my hands. It would be kind of hard to like slap someone while I'm clapping. So it doesn't necessarily meet the function of the challenging behavior, but it chooses something that they can't do at the same time. I had someone that I think like it was picking, I want to say. I'm trying to remember. We'll just go with picking. They picked a lot and they made their hands bleed. And so I talked with the staff about, you know, if you kind of notice some of that behavior starting, have them keep their hands busy so they can't pick. You know, if they're folding towels, they can't pick their hands at the same time as folding towels. But we still want to make sure that it's something that the person can do. We don't want to tell the person to sing a song if they really don't like have any vocalizations that they make. So just kind of focusing on, okay, if they are throwing items, what's something they can do with their hands to keep their hands busy so they're not throwing items? If they're yelling, what's something we can do with our voice so that we're not yelling? That one's a little bit challenging, but it's just kind of using like trying to be creative as possible and figuring out, okay, what's something we can have them do instead of the behavior where they can't engage in the behavior. It's a little bit of blocking the behavior and also, you know, helping them kind of come up with ways to cope during that situation as well. So we definitely want to reinforce the incompatible behavior as soon as possible, provide whatever reinforcement that you're going to provide to them, make sure that you're praising them as well for engaging in that behavior by using that behavior specific praise. And then we don't want to reinforce the challenging behavior if it does occur, and trying to just kind of ignore it as much as possible if it's safe to do so. So those are all kind of explanations of different types of differential reinforcement. If you are interested, there's definitely, if you just look up like differential reinforcement, they've got all the different kinds that they explain, different visuals and stuff like that if you are interested. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, focusing on the positive, making sure that we're providing, you know, the people we support with things they can do, things that they can work on and grow towards, and just being supportive of that as much as possible. So I have a video in the next slide that I thought was kind of cute that I wanted to share. And it's a little bit of an example of what we just talked about, but I'll explain afterwards. We can't hear it, Zach.
Is that better, Tiffany?
It's not playing.
Help those local kids and police. Yep. Parents, Kate Merrill has the story tonight, new at 10. Officer Paul Lagoa is busy patrolling the streets of Walpole when suddenly he sees a Jeep he wants to pull over, but it's not what you'd expect.
We saw your son stand by your side and walk with you to the car, and he held your hands.
Officer Lagoa is targeting 6-year-old Jack in the back seat, not for something bad, but what he did good. He said that he stood beside me and you held my hand. This is all part of the Walpole Police Chief's new initiative called the Positive Ticket. When a kid in town does something right, they want to celebrate it.
When they realize that you're more than the badge and the blue shirt, and it just, it melts your heart. Here's your free ice cream.
So Jack will get an ice cream cone coupon, and he's not the only one.
If you don't mind, I'd like to give your son a free ice cream cone on the Walpole Police Department.
Arna was holding his mom's hand crossing the street.
Next time you go to Scoops, you bring this card, and you tell them Officer Paul sent you, and you get a free ice cream, okay?
The kids can hardly believe it.
That's my name. That's a date.
But the lights and sirens catch some by surprise.
I know, buddy. I'm pulling you over. You can't go anywhere.
9-year-old Marty thought the worst,
I thought that I was gonna get in trouble.
but instead he gets an ice cream for wearing his helmet. But beating Officer Lagoa seems to be the real treat.
Nice.
I've never gotten to talk to a police like this.
To put a smile on a kid's face like that, it's priceless. You can't ask for anything else.
In Walpole, Kate Merrill, WBC News.
So I thought that was a really cute video. When I was looking up videos for like differential reinforcement, there were actually quite a few programs like this around the country. The only thing I will say was that officer pulled over that kid in the end and he seemed a little scared. And then he told the kid, you can't go anywhere. So kind of like going off of differential reinforcement, they are using differential reinforcement for these kids, but he probably should have told that kid like, wait for me for a minute instead of saying, don't go anywhere, I gotcha, kind of a thing. So this is just kind of a reminder that like getting pulled over is scary. I'm sure, especially for that kid on the bike, like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? So it's kind of taking that and making it more positive. Like he didn't have to be, pulling the kid over for something bad. There are positive things that we can all do to kind of change the script and make people feel like they're doing something good in the world. And it feels good to know that you're doing good and you are being an awesome person, right? So we definitely want to just kind of a reminder, like I've seen people that I've got on my caseload that will, I'm kind of watching from afar and they'll start to engage in, a challenging behavior like picking or something. And a staff will walk into the room and they'll be like they weren't doing it, like they didn't want to get caught. And I'm sure that that's because, previously the staff would be like, no, stop, don't do that. I caught you, kind of a thing. So it's just kind of building a little bit of a different culture and wording stuff, hey, like, let's use our hands to, fold some towels. Just kind of using those negative reactions that we had and turning them into positive ones with differential reinforcement so that we can focus on the good things that our people can do. And then we can support them in doing. So that kind of wraps up my section. I will hand it over to Kurt.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm taking things on by talking about a couple of different concepts, starting with contingency contracting. Basically, this is just a written document that's going to describe specific behavior. In addition to that, it's also going to describe the reward that, with whatever goal is set. Just like ABA and how Zach had mentioned that as a whole, it can be applied in many different areas. Contingency contracts can be used in a variety of different settings. Maybe the academic world with, teachers and students, the vocational setting with an employer and its employees. In the sports world, which I have an example to show in a couple of slides, maybe at home with some chores with your kids, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be applied to many different types of situations and scenarios. These contracts or documents can be fun and easy to create, and they can have a lot of advantages, right? Not only do they provide clear expectations for the person doing the work or whoever's, exhibiting the desired behaviors, but also for the person who's providing the reward. Other advantages, these contracts can provide consistency, some structure, some organization to the behavioral support needs that we're kind of focusing on. And they can be really helpful, I think, to anyone who's working toward some type of goal that's deemed important by the team. They can be applied really to almost any type of behavior. They have the added benefit, I think, of facilitating and improving communication between the parties that are involved. So everyone should be on the same page when you have these contracts in place. There should be no room for misinterpretation or trying to figure out, what's going on, on either side. It should be a streamlined document where everyone's kind of all together and on the same page. I think one of the crucial aspects of a contingency contract, I apologize, I cannot say the words contingency contract without sounding like a robot. I just can't, it's difficult. One of the crucial aspects of a contingency contract is that the individual has input in the planning process. Being part of the development of the contract or of the plan and negotiating and agreeing upon the components of the plan, it could really lead to the individual being more motivated to follow the terms of the contract, as opposed to maybe trying to follow a contract that was written and developed by someone else, maybe someone that the individual doesn't even know all too well. So it really helps to him or her a sense of ownership of their behaviors and their actions and what they're trying to strive for. Now you'll see these contracts written a little differently, I think, depending on who wrote it and where it's coming from. But, behavior contracts are typically divided into three kind of essential sections. The first section is going to identify and describe the task or the job that has to be done. This description is going to include the name of the person who's going to be completing the task, the name of the task, for example, maybe preparing for school, right? Just throwing an example out there. And when the task should be completed. It also includes a detailed description of the behavioral expectations, so how well the behavior should be performed in order for the reward to be earned. So for example, in the scenario of maybe preparing for school, David will make his bed, he'll get dressed and pack his lunch every morning by 6:30 a.m. with no more than one reminder. This must be completed for 4 out of 5 days of the school week for the reward to be earned. You want to be as specific as possible when you're laying out this type of information, when you're describing the task. You want the individual to know exactly what they need to do to earn that reward. The second section of the contract describes the reward. So maybe the reward for David is staying up late or staying up later than he typically does on a given night. So we're going to describe the reward, who will provide the reward, and when it will be earned. It's also going to include a description of how much of the reward will be earned. So for example, maybe David can stay up an extra hour for 2 consecutive nights, right? So again, just being as specific as possible so that there's no wiggle room in terms of what's expected or what's not expected or whatnot. The third section of the contract is going to describe the recording of the task. So for the example that I've been kind of using, David's going to record his progress toward earning the reward. Again, this could look different depending on who's making it, but for the sake of this example, let's say the task record, might list the days of the week, right? And then it can include 2 empty boxes next to each day. One box would be for David to check off after he completes the task. And then the other box would be for his parents, maybe to verify that he completed the required tasks and received his reward. Are these contracts going to be perfect and solve everything right away? Of course not. It may take some trial and error to figure out, what's rewarding for the person, or maybe how long someone wants to work for the reward, what tasks they should be completing, etc. So, maybe you just get to a point where you realize that a contingency contract just isn't appropriate for someone, and that's okay. I sometimes have to remind myself that many parts of this field is based on experimenting and trial and error. But when done right, I think that this could potentially, be a good tool to utilize in guiding someone down the right path. Next slide, Zach. Thank you. So this is just one that I found online. It's pretty simple, cut and dry expectations. You could see the behavior listed there. It says at the beginning of the math period, Alicia will turn in her math homework. Criteria: if Alicia turns in her math homework 4 out of 5 days, the reinforcement is that she will earn a gel pen. And then you have the contract period, March 24th to March 28th. And then it's signed by the teacher and the student. And then you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for her to mark off how many days she turned in her homework. So, again, we want this to be simple, pretty cut and dry as best as you can. It doesn't have to be some 5-page document, listing all of this encompassing information. It can really be as simple as this. There's the clear reward, there's the time frame, it's signed, it's, you really don't have to complicate things. It could be this simple if you want it to be. One thing I didn't mention on the previous slide or the previous couple slides is that these contracts should be super personable. So whereas the previous slide was a pretty bare document, and that's fine. If it gets the job done, that's what's most important. But it could be sometimes helpful to kind of go a little bit extra and make it personable for the person who's on the, who's expected to do these things. The picture I have here isn't an actual contract, but it was a component or a part of a contract that I made in the past when trying to reinforce someone's positive behavior. So just to kind of put things into perspective or into context, this person was or is super into anything and everything related to the 1970s. We're talking music, clothing, decor, everything. Loved the 70s. So I just wanted to add a little extra piece to get him moving. In addition to this document, I also had this little clear plastic jar, kind of like a mason jar, but a plastic, with a slit like in the lid. And anytime he completed an act of kindness, he tore off one of these little peace sign tabs and put it in the jar. So for this example specifically, we were looking at the behavior of, by the end of each day, I will complete at least one act of kindness. I had a list here of different things that he could do. And I made it known that this was just, these are just mere suggestions, and you could do, certainly more than this or different things than this. And his mother did help him along the way in ensuring that, what he did was considered an act of kindness. The criteria that we set up, if he completed 12 acts of kindness out of a 2-week period, he would then earn a vinyl record at the end of that time frame. So for the contract period, we would set it up every 2 weeks. I think adding a component like this to a contract can really kind of push the person maybe past the point that's going to, continue to keep them motivated, and just kind of wanted to show you how you can make things a little personable and fun for someone. Just to apply, contingency contracting, maybe outside of the box of your typical, IDD field, just wanted to switch gears and look at the NBA for a second. It's actually not entirely uncommon for some athletes to have weight clauses built into their contract to make sure that these athletes are, at an optimal weight to make sure that they can, perform at that level that they're getting paid to perform at. So this is a picture of Glenn Davis. He was a former player for the Celtics, Magic, Clippers. And he had one of these clauses built into his contract. He's on record of talking about, struggling, maintaining a specific weight at times in his career. So in one of these contracts that he signed, it was included that he would earn an extra $500,000 if he were to make an unspecified to the public. It was clear to him how much he had to make weight. He would make $500,000 if he would basically meet these weight goals at various parts of the season. I don't know if he ever met this goal or not, but that's kind of beside the point of what I'm making here. A weight clause like this, they've been used throughout the NBA in the past. Arguments can be made, for or against them. But the point is, these contingency contracts, are all around you if you just kind of take a second to look closely. In terms of application, so again, a major part of these contingency contracts is going to be that if-then component. To sort of reiterate what Tiffany went over, these if-then statements in general can really help people be motivated to complete some tasks if they, might not otherwise, want to do them. But just always make sure that the then is something that can be realistically provided for someone. I've been in situations in a residential setting where maybe a first shift staff member says something like, hey, if you do, this task, then on second shift, you can go to the movies. When in reality, maybe that first shift staff member isn't even working on second shift and doesn't even know for sure if going to the movies is a viable option. So make sure that then component is something that can be provided in the immediate future. We don't want to give anyone any false promises or false hope of something, because that's going to, really hurt the credibility of staff and, trying to get things accomplished maybe in the future. Like Zach kind of mentioned briefly at the top, we're not bribing here. We're not negotiating during the occurrence of a challenging behavior. We're figuring this stuff out ahead of time. We're planning for the future. So just to be clear with some people who sometimes get confused with that. Again, make sure that then is something that's attainable, something you can produce. The second bullet point there, contingency behavior contract, I kind of already went over that. So I'll move along to the last bullet point, reinforcement program, or maybe like a star chart, maybe earning stickers, tokens, stamps, whatever, as part of someone's program can be helpful. Just like the 70s, peace signs on the previous couple of slides, sometimes seeing a visual display of some component of the contract can be helpful for someone. Maybe if it's some type of, chart or calendar or a spreadsheet, anything that can maybe help the individual visualize their progress can help motivate them further. Again, try to make this part fun too. I used to work with a girl who was super into My Little Pony. And that was just the two things that were important for her in life were her iPad and My Little Pony. And so she had a reward chart, and it was just kind of like a decent sized chart. But rather than just having it, black and white, empty squares, I filled that whole chart up with just a collage of, My Little Pony pictures. And, instead of, clicking on, a star or a check mark or a smiley face, I made sure to, laminate and Velcro these, specific My Little Pony characters that she liked. And she was super into that, wanted to look at her progress. I think that helped motivate her even more. I mean, she said it did. So, and I'm willing to believe her behavior that we were trying to improve, improved. So again, make it fun, make it personable. I think that you can see some better results if you kind of go that extra mile. The other part that I'm going to talk about, generalization and maintenance. Why does this matter? What's generalization in the first place? On the slide here I have, it's when a behavior can be displayed in different situations, in other settings, and with other people. We want adaptive, pro-social behaviors to occur everywhere, not just at the school, the clinic, or wherever that behavior is being taught. So why does this matter? Like I said, we want to produce this behavior change outside of the training context. And we want to make sure that this behavior is going to last, or this change is going to last for an extended period of time. And that's where the maintenance component kind of comes into play. So maybe think about some individuals who are only receiving treatment at a behavior clinic where they go for, X amount of hours a day or a week or whatever. What happens when they go home? These concepts and skills or whatever else they're being taught, they need to go beyond the clinic or with, beyond that one person who's helping them learn this thing that they're learning. We want to make sure that, they can go into the natural environment and have this carryover effect. I always like the example of someone being able to recite their name and address and phone number, or maybe other, important identifying information. So maybe a child can provide this information when asked by their parent, but what if that child is in a situation where they become lost while out in the community? What if a community member asks for their name or address and they can't say it? If this skill of identifying information, if this skill is generalized to different people, such as family members or teachers or therapists or community members, right? And across various settings. So maybe at home or school, at the park, the doctor's office, and within various contexts. So maybe saying, what's your name versus tell me your name. You combine all that together and you might, make it easier for this community member to help out and get that child home in a safe manner. So kind of an extreme example, but shows the importance of learning this stuff and being able to apply it outside of just that teaching moment or teaching context or environment. I write an article about a handful of individuals who are having a tough time experiencing some standard dental procedures during their appointments with the dentist. And so the authors of this article created what was essentially like a dental simulation with, I think it was with rented equipment, where the students were gradually exposed to the various procedures of just like a normal dental appointment or routine. That combined with, putting their disruptive behaviors on extinction resulted in those treatment effects being generalized to a real life dental clinic, because they were all, experiencing that trouble in the actual appointment, practicing it, putting those behaviors on extinction, it really made a difference when they had to, go on to these appointments in real life. So again, making sure that we're going beyond the teaching environment and making sure that it could happen in the natural environment is going to be, super important. And then maintenance is just making sure that the individual can do this over time. So they learn the skill or the task, and then we want to make sure that they maintain that skill down the road. We don't want to just stop practicing this once they're able to do it just a few times, right? We want to make sure that this ability doesn't get lost or kind of fades away over time. I was trying to think of a couple of examples, as I was going through, this concept of maintenance. And one thing that popped into my mind was learning Spanish. Back in high school, I took Spanish for 4 years, and I like to think that I was able to carry a conversation with someone, or at least get my point across to someone if I needed to, right? Fast forward many years to today, and I'm pretty sure my son, who's going into first grade, probably knows more Spanish than I do. I didn't maintain that skill at all, and I've lost that ability to even carry simple conversation in Spanish. So practice, even after you kind of get a grasp on things, it's important to keep practicing before you lose that skill or that ability. One more thing about maintenance, we learn how to do it, and then we make sure to keep practicing, right? So the other example I thought of was parallel parking. With parallel parking, you might have learned how to do it maybe during driver's ed, right? When you were 16 or 15 or 16 or whatever. But let's say, years and years go by without having to parallel park again. Or maybe you only need to parallel park just a couple of times a year, depending on where you live or where you travel to. Chances are, if you do it infrequently, you may not be as good as you would be if you had to do it every day. So for me, growing up, and still today, my parents live on this very, very narrow one-way street in Chicago. And when I started driving, I like to think I was pretty good at parallel parking, having to do it almost every single day, or at least as often as I drove. Got pretty good at it. Fast forward, 20 years later, I'm living in a pretty rural area of the state now, and I rarely parallel park. I have a driveway and a garage, and I feel like most places I go to now have a parking lot. The point is, I don't parallel park as much as I did when I was younger. So anytime I go to my parents, I get just a little embarrassed at sometimes needing, multiple attempts to park the car in the street. So again, maintenance. I'm not keeping up with that skill of parallel parking, and it's being lost over time without practice. And I'm sure in another 5-10 years, I just will not be able to parallel park. But the more practice you have at it, the more we can maintain that skill that we learned. The last slide that I have are just some strategies to enhance generalization. So how do we make sure that we're going to set someone up for generalization? First, we want to teach a lot of examples, right? We don't, just want to use one picture when we're teaching someone the word dog, for example. As soon as possible, introduce other different pictures or other pictures of different dogs, maybe to teach the individual to generalize, right? This golden retriever isn't the only dog. There's over 300 other breeds of dogs out there. So using lots of examples so that they can start to generalize. You want to use 2 or more teachers, or maybe consider pairing an additional staff member, depending on the setting or the environment. If this child says dog when asked by a teacher, but doesn't have the same response when asked by, let's say a substitute teacher, then there has been, some lack of generalization, maybe to some unfamiliar people. So we want to use multiple teachers, get that person accustomed to, performing these skills and tasks with other people. Maybe pairing an additional, I have a tendency to go back to the residential setting. Maybe pairing an additional staff member with a preferred staff member could help. So say you're working in, this group home setting, and you have that one superstar direct care worker who knows that individual inside and out, and they have a good rapport. They've worked with each other for a long time. A new staff member comes along, and you'll want to pair those two together so that the individual is exposed to the new staff while still feeling comfortable with that familiar face that they know really well. And then a bonus side effect to that is that the new staff member can see firsthand all the great and positive, interactions between the client and the preferred staff member. So just some things to consider, pairing that additional staff member, even better if it's preferred staff member, that could help a lot. We want to practice mastered skills, again, maintaining that skill, right? Maybe you can do this by bringing out old materials and making sure that the person can still perform the skill. Keeping old flashcards, worksheets, whatever you have, maybe pulling some stuff out, save some things, pull out some resources, materials, and review that, over time, just to make sure that he or she's getting that practice. Again, teach behaviors in multiple environments. I won't drill this concept. I feel like I kind of already went over that. Use a variety of instructions. So for example, if you're teaching a child to respond to the question, how old are you? These two questions, while different, they're still asking for the same information, asking for that child's age. They have options to put on a jacket or get a blanket or maybe turn the heat on, right? There's different responses. Wanted to, so I see someone saying that I apologize, my audio and my video
Kurt, you're frozen and we can't hear you. If you want to come into my office, you can finish up that way.
Sorry about that, everybody. Kurt lost his internet connection, but he concluded his portion of the presentation. Are you there, Tiffany?
I am. So we've got a couple minutes if there are questions. Looks like Jeff doesn't have any questions. If anyone else does, you can just type them into the chat. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so we will wrap things up. Thank you everyone for attending. Danielle will get those CEs out to you. If you don't receive them, I believe it's in the next 2 weeks, correct me if I'm wrong, Danielle, then you can reach out and we'll make sure that those get sent out to you. All right, thank you everyone. Have a good day.